Hello, today I will be presenting on the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. This is one of the most important policies shaping education for children with disabilities in the United States. So to look at what we're going into today, we're first going to talk about a summary, just a brief overview of the policy. Then we'll look at the perspectives that are either for the act or against the act. Then we'll look at ethics and how the policy aligns with the NASW Code of Ethics or kind of has some lack of alignment. And then as well as talk about some discussion questions and just prompts to spark meaningful conversation. So first, going into the summary, IDEA was originally passed in 1975 as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act and was reauthorized several times, most recently being in 2004. So of note is that IDEA is federally funded but implemented by each state. So schools must follow federal guidelines to receive funding, and students are identified through different evaluations, which are then used to create a custom plan called an IEP. Its purpose overall is to ensure that children with disabilities have access to a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. So more or less, it sets the standards for identifying, evaluating, and educating students with disabilities. So looking at its key components, the first one would be free, appropriate public education, which is designed to ensure that students are prepared for life after school, whether that be in the form of college, employment, or independent living. So this means that all students with disabilities have the right to receive an education at no cost to their families, and that the education must be customized to meet their unique needs. Next up would be the Individualized Education Program, which I briefly mentioned earlier, which is also called an IEP. So this IEP is a legally binding document that's created just particularly for that individual student, and it kind of outlines their current levels of performance, annual goals, and accommodations they'll receive. Another component would be the parental involvement and student participation. So IDEA emphasizes that parents are equal partners in their child's education, so parents must be invited to all meetings, have access to educational records, and give informed consent before any service changes or reevaluations. But as students get older, particularly around the age of 16 or high school years, they're encouraged to join their IEP meetings too to help build self-advocacy skills and have a voice in shaping their future. Lastly, for procedural safeguards, this just basically describes a set of legal protections for families. So if a parent disagrees with the school's decisions, they have a right to request mediation or file a complaint or even request a due process hearing. Moving into perspectives, first up, there's some supportive views of this act. So firstly, IDEA is praised for promoting equity and inclusion by ensuring that students with disabilities receive the same educational opportunities as their peers. So according to one academic journal done in 2010, IDEA has fundamentally changed the landscape of public education by affirming that disability should never be a barrier to learning or achievement. So it's a very major civil rights advancement by mandating that public schools serve all students equitably. Further, another positive supportive view of it is that it's a very strong model compared to international standards. There was an academic journal done in 2024 that kind of dove into the differences between the United States education system for students with disabilities versus that of Iran. And they noted how strong the continual sustained support is for students with disabilities. And then another major strength would be the emphasis on collaborative practices and strong partnerships between educators, healthcare providers, and families. So while the act is not completely perfect, these features make it a very powerful and widely respected policy. But there's also very valid critiques. So these mainly stem from economic barriers and systemic inequalities. There's an academic journal that argues that the complexity of IDEA can make it inaccessible for low-income families. So they point out that navigating the system often requires legal knowledge or advocacy, which not all families can afford. So this raises the concern that wealthier parents have better access to resources, which that in turn creates unequal outcomes. So these critiques suggest a need for reform to ensure that all students benefit equally from the law. Moving into ethics, for alignment of ethics with the NASW Code of Ethics, I looked at dignity and worth of a person, importance of human relationships, and competence. So for dignity and worth of a person, it promotes inclusion and respect for students with disabilities. For importance of human relationships, the law relies on collaboration between families, educators, and professionals. So this human relationship is key. And then in terms of competence, it requires trained professionals to assess and serve student needs effectively. Moving into tensions that could arise with the NASW Code of Ethics, I looked at social justice, cultural competence in social diversity, and then confidentiality and privacy. So for social injustice, while IDEA mandates equal access to services, in practice, these services are not always equitably distributed. So depending on socioeconomic status, this could have an impact on whether or not an individual receives the same level of education as another. And then for cultural competence, students of color may be either over or under-identified for services, which kind of reflects a systemic bias in the IDEA implementation. And then for confidentiality and privacy, sharing information in IEP meetings may conflict with privacy standards, since IDEA encourages collaboration among professionals. And then for discussion, I came up with 2 discussion questions to kind of reflect on and wrap up with. So my first question would be, in what ways could IDEA be reformed to better serve economically disadvantaged families? And my second question would be, how can social workers advocate for students' rights within school systems that may not fully utilize IDEA? So here are a list of the resources that I used to research this topic and learn more about the Act. And thank you. Thank you so much for watching my presentation. I hope it deepened anyone's understanding of the law and its social justice implications, and I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's thoughts in the discussion board. Thanks.